Are we Sunday the 20th?
20th Sunday in ordinary time, correct. August 20th.
A reading from the book of the prophet Isaiah. Thus says the Lord, observe what is right, do what is just. For my salvation is about to come, my justice about to be revealed. The foreigners who join themselves to the Lord, ministering to him, loving the name of the Lord, and becoming his servants, all who keep the Sabbath free from profanation and hold to my covenant, them I will bring to my holy mountain and make joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and sacrifices will be acceptable on my altar, for my house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Do we have a reference number, please, so we know what page we're on?
For readings for next Sunday.
This is the upcoming Sunday readings.
Okay.
So for the Mass coming up. So this from Isaiah. And so this is one of the later books in Isaiah.
We don't have that.
No, it's not in there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry then.
Oh, the interruption's accepted this one time. But if you look what he says, observe what is right, do what is just, for my salvation is about to come, my justice about to be revealed. He's not saying have faith. I mean, he's telling you it's observing what is right and doing what is just, so it's your actions, right? We kind of understand that. That's kind of understood that it's our actions done in faith, in love of God. I mean, but it's doing something. It's not just having this, well, in this faith. I mean, it's actually the doing of something, that this correct action that God calls us to do. And so I think that's important because, and then he goes on to say the foreigners. So remember, there was the people of, the Jewish nation, and then there was everybody else, right? And so that's kind of the common theme that we're going to see in the readings for this week, is that the Gentiles are also called into God's family. And so the foreigners who join themselves to the Lord, ministering to him, loving the name of the Lord, and becoming his servants, so they're also going to be brought to the holy mountain. It's not just for Jews, it's for all people who keep his covenant. And so we can see that it's not a racial thing, it's for all people. And so the Jews, I mean, they thought the covenant was for Jews only. And then there was the Jews, and then there was the Goyim, the dogs, that's what they would call the Gentiles. They would treat them like dogs. Now, throughout history, the Jews have been treated poorly, but they also treated people that way too. I mean, they would say, you're outside, we have nothing to do with you. They're not even allowed to go into the same room with them. If they were in the presence of them, they'd have to do some ritual cleansing and stuff like that. So I guess looking at this, God is saying, look, the foreigners are also going to be brought into my covenant. Anybody have any questions? Oh, Kyle, go ahead.
I think this is something we're going to see more and more too as we're going through the other book. But it's kind of interesting how when there's a tie in Exodus too, how often sacrifice is tied with also party or celebration. Even here, talks about bringing to the holy mount for sacrifice, but it's make joyful. So there's always this tie of there's this happiness that comes with the sacrifice, and I think that is something to hold on to, especially the more we get into that book and realize what comes in the later mansions.
Right.
It's important to realize because it doesn't always seem that way on the surface.
Right. When you're starting out, it may seem a little difficult going in the, the repentance and turning away from sin may seem painful. I mean, but it's not. I mean, the joy that we're giving up sand for the greatest treasures in the world that we can't even conceive of. But that's a good point. That that's the illusion. That's why so few people give up the pleasures of the world for the things of God, because they don't see the value in it. And so they're making that decision. They think, well, I don't see heaven. I don't. It's I can't touch it or feel it. And so why should I give up what I can see and feel right now? And so, you can, and in a sense, I can see where they're coming from. There is some reasoning behind that, but it's only because, and then once they become, once they go down that pathway of sin and, addiction or whatever it may be, slavery to sin, they really don't see any other way. It kind of clouds their mind. They see their perspective of reality is so narrow that they don't see outside of that little, it's kind of having blinders on. I guess that's what they used to do with horses. They would put, so they would keep on the path. Right? Anybody ever see that? Did you guys ever go up like Mackinac Island or something? You see they have.
I've seen it on the farm, huh?
Did ya?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
When they
Frankenmuth.
have the tours of the.
Oh yeah, with the beer
Bunny.
horses.
They all are decorated different color with roses and stuff. And you can pay for a ride.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Anybody want to read the psalm? Do I have a volunteer? Oh, Dan's gonna.
I'll read it. I'm a sinner, remember? I gotta go to confession first.
You can still read the psalm.
O God, let all the nations praise you.
Oh God, let all the nations praise you.
May God have pity on us and bless us. May he let his face shine upon us. So may your way be known upon earth, among all nations, your salvation.
Oh God, let all the nations praise you.
May the nations be glad and exult, because you rule the peoples in equity. The nations on the earth you guide.
Oh God, let all the nations praise you.
May the peoples praise you, O God. May all the peoples praise you. May God bless us, and may all the ends of the earth fear him.
Oh God, let all the nations praise you. So a couple points. Praise, one, right? God's asking for praise. In the last verse, it talks about, and may all the ends of the earth fear him. So we have praise and fear. God's owed, once you realize who God is and who we are, fear is the beginning of wisdom. It's not knowledge, but it's fear of the Lord that is the beginning of wisdom. Knowledge doesn't lead to wisdom. It's fear of the Lord that is the beginning of wisdom. And I think, just from, it's, that's how we train our kids, right? We teach them, when we're trying to teach them something, we say, do this, don't do that, and there's that, there's that, there's consequences if they don't do what you're saying. At least there should be, especially when they're young. That's how you train them. And God says in his book that God chastises every child that he loves. And so there should be some kind of discipline. And when we're not being disciplined, watch out. It's good when you're being chastised. It doesn't feel good at the time. But I would rather chastise my children than have the law chastise my children. Because, if you go into the legal system and have a court, you don't want that, right? I'm just saying that's not the way to have it. So we want to teach our children so that they don't have, that society doesn't have to train them, and because it's not going to be the loving, caring parent. It's going to be the, harsh reality of, court system, right? Exactly. So, so because God rules over all the nations, we are called to praise and to fear him. And that's no matter if we're Gentiles or Jews, it's for all people. And I think we have to, I'm bringing that up because at the time this was written, it was for, it was the Jewish people, but it applies to all of us and all people. Okay, a letter from St. Paul to the Romans. We're going to read this, and then I'm going to read the entire section. So, because they skip quite a bit. If you look, they have Romans 11, 13, and 15. So they do 2 verses. Then they do 29 to 32. But they skip 16 to 28. So they give the abridged version. Well, we're going to read a little more. Because we can. It's Bible study. So who would like to read Romans? Okay, Kyle.
Brothers and sisters, I am speaking to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am the apostle to the Gentiles. I glory in my ministry in order to make my race jealous, and thus save some of them. For if their rejection is the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? For the gifts in the call of God are irrevocable, just as you once disobeyed God, but have now received mercy because of the disobedience. So they have now disobeyed in order that, by virtue of the mercy shown to you, they too may now receive mercy. For God delivered all to disobedience, that he might have mercy upon all. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Okay, so St. Paul, and we know his background, he was a Pharisee, so he was very Jewish. I mean, he loves his Jewish people, but they persecuted him. They whipped him, they stoned him, they tried to kill him. We talked about all that. I mean, they pretty much, they took blood oaths to die if they didn't, that they wouldn't eat until they had him killed. And pretty much because he was, also he had a Roman name he bought, because of his position, he had a Roman citizenship. And so he was protected by Roman law. So the Jews couldn't do whatever they wanted to him. And he kind of used that. And he was very smart. And so in some particular cases, he would take points of theology because the Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection of the dead and the Pharisees did. So he would use that. And it caused a big riot between the two of them, the two groups. And it's kind of like the House of Representatives and the Senate, because the Sadducees were, that's kind of one way to look at it. They were very small. It was an elite group. And the Pharisees were much bigger. And then they had the scribes who would go through the law and kind of pick through it. And they were the ones that also nitpicked Jesus. But I'm going to read all of it here because there's a lot in the middle that they skip over. They kind of have it abridged because people can't spend more than an hour at church. And I'm not sure if that's the reason, but
But it's a whole hour.
I know. So
Apparently I'm not in the right book, but I got the Bible here, so which,
okay, so it's Romans 11,
Romans 11?
verse 12. Actually, verse 13 through 32.
All right, I got Romans 11.
Now I am speaking to you, Gentiles, inasmuch that I am an apostle to the Gentiles. I magnify my ministry in order to make my fellow Jews jealous and thus save some of them. For if their rejection means the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance mean but life from the dead? If the dough offered as first fruits is holy, so is the whole batch. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. But if some of the branches were broken off, and you, a wild olive shoot, were grafted into the place to share the richness of the olive tree, do not boast over the branches. So are you guys familiar that if you have a tree, you can graft a branch into it, and basically it'll be living on the rootstock of the other, and it'll, and they did this, and if it wasn't producing. And so they knew about this, 2,000 years ago.
That's what they do with roses.
Yeah, they do it with roses, and they do it with a lot of stuff, apple trees, and
The wild rose don't flourish like grafted.
right.
It's a lost art of building like arches and stuff on your property by using trees too. I think we used to do architecture with that.
Yeah, Yep. Now it's mass production. But what he's saying is that if you boast, so we were grafted on. If God didn't save the original, then don't boast, because, what makes you think that you're just a grafted in piece. You're not even as important as the original that he had his original covenant with. And so he's warning them against pride, and, and he's kind of letting them know that, hey, this is not something to boast about. You will say, branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. That is true. They were broken off because of their unbelief, but you stand fast only through faith. So do not become proud, but stand in awe. For if God did not spare the natural branches, neither will he spare you. Note that the kindness and the severity of God. Severity toward those who have fallen, but God's kindness to you, provided you continue in his kindness. Otherwise, you too will be cut off. And even the others, if they do not persist in their unbelief, will be grafted in. For God has the power to graft them in again. He's saying that they can come back to him. The Jews, and that's what Paul is hoping and praying for. He loves his Jewish people. And Jesus did too. He said, like a mother hen, I wish you would, come to me and so I could help you and save you, but you would not. For if you have been cut off from what is by nature a wild olive tree and grafted, contrary to nature, into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these natural branches be grafted back into their own olive tree? Lest you be wise in your own conceits, I want you to understand this mystery, brethren. A hardening has come upon part of Israel, until the full number of the Gentiles come in, and so all Israel will be saved, as it is written. The deliverer will come from Zion. He will banish ungodliness from Jacob, and this will be my covenant with them when I take away their sins. As regard the gospel, they are enemies of God for your sake, but as regard election, they are beloved for the sake of their forefathers. For the gifts and the call of the God are irrevocable. And so that's what we picked up again. Just as you were once disobedient to God, but now have received mercy because of their disobedience, so they have now been disobedient in order that by the mercy shown to you, they also may receive mercy. For God has consigned all men to disobedience, that he may have mercy upon all. So you guys see, there was quite a bit that was kind of taken out of there, where he's really going into kind of showing us that, don't be proud. Don't, just because you're hearing the good news as Gentiles. But Paul's really wanting, all his people to also come into the faith. He wants, if we have, the more that we're like Christ, the more we want to have people that we know and even we don't know saved. We want people in heaven. And the more we're like Christ, the more we have a burning desire for people to be saved, to turn away from sin and to turn toward God. And when we get into this book, it becomes more and more evident. And actually, St. Catherine says that at the end time, people are going to be one way or the other, and their choice is going to be very clear. And we'll kind of get into that, because it's really, what she says is startling. And it's kind of shocking. Okay, Joe's not here, so we need someone to read the gospel. We miss him today. But he can listen to the YouTube video if need be.
If no volunteers, I'll read again.
Good, Dan. It's his birthday. Happy birthday, Dan.
Yeah, I gotta read happy birthday.
That book you're reading now, is that the Bible?
Yes.
And I have to make up for the past absence.
You have double duty.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. At that time, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Canaanite woman of that district came and called out, "Have pity on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But Jesus did not say a word in answer to her. Jesus' disciples came and asked her, "Send her away, for she keeps calling out after us." He said in reply, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But the woman came and did Jesus homage, saying, "Lord, help me." He said in reply, "It is not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Please, Lord, for even the dogs eat the scraps that fall from the table of their masters." Then Jesus said to her in reply, "O woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And the woman's daughter was healed from that hour. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. Okay, that's, I always get a lot of questions about this particular gospel because at one point Jesus says, it's not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs. And basically, making her, the analogy is that, she's unclean, an unclean Gentile dog. And he was called to the house of Israel first. And so that was the mission, is to go first to the house of Israel. But when we get it, we'll kind of get into the background of it. This Canaanite woman, she, first of all, Jesus withdrew to the Tyre and Sidon because he was tired. And he went with the apostles, and they were on their own little retreat, right, at the time. And this Canaanite woman, now, she wouldn't even be alive if they were obedient. Because way back when, God told them that they were all to die. They weren't to leave any alive. And so, they were called to destroy every person of that race because they'd be a problem to them in the future. And they were disobedient. They didn't kill everybody. So she actually is alive because of that. But she addressed him as, "Have pity on me, Lord." And this is the title for, this isn't just, like an important person. This is Lord. This is God, Lord. This, and Son of David, which is Messiah. There's two titles that she addresses him by. And she says, "My daughter is tormented by a demon." And so she didn't see all the miracles the apostles did. I mean, the apostles have been with Jesus for a couple years plus, and they've seen him do miracle after miracle, and, they've been with him. She didn't have all that, and here she is addressing him by Lord and Son of David. Jesus just ignored her. He didn't say a word. And the disciples came and said, "Get rid of her. Heal or do something with her. She's going to screw up our retreat." It's like, well, why is she, she's calling after us. She's a pain. She's a pest. Get rid of her. So, and Jesus said, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And the woman comes back and she drops the Son of David, right? And she just says, "Lord, help me." So you see, before she said, "Lord, Son of David," which is the Messiah also term, but this time she just says, "Lord, help me." And then he said, "It is not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs." And so she could have been at this point, this is kind of a test. Is she going to continue or is she going to go away? And at this point, this woman whose daughter is, possessed or tormented, we don't know exactly what was going on with her, but she probably already went to the regular people of, her nation, and maybe even, and she tried everything, I'm sure. Wouldn't you guys try everything if your child had such a problem? Of course. And so finally she just says, "Lord, help me." And then he goes, that's when he says, "It is not right to take this food and throw it to the dogs," which she's smart, though, because she goes, "Please, Lord, for even the dogs eat the scraps that fall from the table of their masters." And this word for dog there's a couple of words that were used for dogs. And one of them is, that they believe I don't know if you guys have ever seen like little puppies and they'll eat the scraps on their tables and stuff. Well, that's kind of the dogs that's referred to. It's not the ones prowling out in the, licking Lazarus' wounds. Those weren't the little dogs. Those were more of the ravaged beasts out there. And so she says, even the scraps that fall, these little dogs, they'll clean it up. And Jesus just acknowledged that. And she said, "Oh, woman, great is your faith." And you think about it, it's what she was given, the faith she had. Now, the apostles, Peter, he saw tons of miracles, and he got out of the boat. He did get out of the boat. None of the other guys did, but he got out of the boat, and he started to walk. And Jesus said, why did you doubt? but she was persistent, and Jesus says, great is your faith. And so he does, he acknowledges her faith. And so I think when we look at what she does here, and how she approaches it, and she's persistent too, Jesus praises the faith that she has.
But did he come? He came for everybody, so why would he not? That's like, it's like, that's mean.
Like he went to the woman at the well and
Yeah,
other
I
people
mean,
that weren't,
Yeah.
And sometimes our faith is tested, right?
But I think you hit the point when you said this could be a test.
Yeah, our faith is tested. I mean, why do you think, you know what? So when you read Job, I mean, like I said, I spent a lot of hours on Job, but God allowed, Satan was wandering the earth, and he says, what are you doing, Satan? Oh, I'm wandering across the earth. And he said, oh, have you ever seen my faithful servant Job? And he said, yeah, the only reason he's doing any good is because you gave him a hedge of protection around him, and you blessed him with all this stuff. He says, well, he'd still do it even, but he was tested. And so God allowed all that stuff to be taken away.
Didn't Jesus know what her answer was going to be without the questioning? Didn't he know how she was going to respond as he continued?
She still had free will to respond any way
I
she
know
wanted.
She did, but it's just like when Jesus said, I knew the answer to this, but I did this to give God glory.
Right.
So again, it's another situation where
It's pulling it out.
he's giving
Right.
God glory, showing this great faith as an example to even his own.
To his apostles, they needed to see that because they had just had a lack of faith, just previously to this. So we can see where he's showing, there's examples of great faith, that, it's going to help his apostles because you can learn. I guess that's the point. If we can learn right now from her faith, then they could learn at that point, and people throughout all of history can learn also from the faith. Even when there's obstacles put in your way, she was persistent, and she just kept going, and she said, and she knew that God. She also had to have that. I mean, she knew that he could do what she wanted, which was to heal her daughter, and she knew that he was the Lord, and she knew that he was the Messiah. And she just kept going until, she got what she wanted, really. I mean, she was just persistent. And Jesus uses this, act of persistence. We need to be persistent, not, have that strong focus on, and our faith should be like that too. I mean, we should be pursuing God with that kind of persistence, pursuing heaven.
It's like that lady and the judge, she kept pestering the judge until she finally got what she wanted.
Yep. Absolutely. So, but that's a good point you brought up, is that why did Jesus, it seems mean, doesn't it? People say it seems mean. And she, when you look at how she took it, I mean, is he saying anything that isn't true? No, he's not saying anything true, because his mission was first to the lost sheep of Israel. And, they are unclean. They were outside of the covenant. First, the people of Israel were to come in, and then the Gentiles. I mean, this is what was prophesied throughout the whole Old Testament, and they did. But he's showing, look at the faith, and look at the Roman centurion. We say his, Lord, I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof, but only say the word, and my soul shall be healed, right? Or my servant shall be healed, right? So why? This was another person that had a proclamation. He said, I have people under me, and when I tell someone to go do something, they'll do it. You don't have to come into my, he's saying, you don't even have to be present. You just have to say the word, and my son will be healed. And that's great faith. I mean, especially at that point, you don't even have to be there. He's saying, I'm a leader. I'm in charge of all these soldiers and groups of people, and I know how things work. He's saying, all you have to do is say the word, and my son will be healed. And so we say that, and then he says, wow, I've not seen this kind of faith in all of Israel. And yet these people that are outside outside of the chosen Israel people, have tremendous faith that exceeds the people, even his own apostles, who he just had, they just doubted. And they're going to all run from him on the day of, the crucifixion, except for John. Go ahead, Kyle.
Do you know, is this story or this interaction in any of the other Gospels? Because it's interesting because it's in the Gospel of Matthew, and I just realized that it's a Canaanite woman. I always thought it was Samaritan.
Yeah, this one's a Canaanite woman.
Yeah, so that's interesting because Matthew was writing for Jews, I believe, right? So
Yeah.
It's interesting, and I guess I wonder if it's only in this Bible too, and if there's anything to that, or especially with the way it's worded and everything.
Yeah, the cross references.
Specifically for the Jewish audience, if that brings the story out even more.
Yeah, and I think it's very important that he uses, so Jesus teaches with every point of contact, and he's primarily teaching his, the cardinals of his church, and he's teaching them, and these are great teachings for them, and exemplify, look, this is how faith should be, and these are people, there isn't and they still had to overcome the fact that Jews and that Gentiles were going to be welcome, and this took a long time. I mean, if you look through Acts, I mean, they weren't really willing to not have them. They had to be circumcised. They had to do all the ritual, stuff. And it was only after a while that they finally, even Peter continued on, and Paul had to confront him to his face because he even said, oh, I'm not going to eat with Gentiles. And Paul said, that's wrong. That's beyond, that's behind us. And so he had to have that miraculous vision where, all these things take and eat, and he's, all these things that you're not allowed to eat. And God told him, take and eat, kill and eat 3 times. And so it was very apparent that don't call unclean what God has made clean. And I think that's the overall point. And so he had to overcome this racial barrier that he had, where they just, they didn't want to have anything to do with them. But when you go ahead.
Did the Jews and the Gentiles look so different that you knew right away that was an unclean person? Or that wasn't a Jewish person?
Well, their dress, yeah, would. Yeah, I mean, they were from the same area.
Anybody else wasn't? They came from far away or something?
Dialect.
Yeah, the dialect, right. I mean, they all would talk a little bit different. And so let's see here on Matthew 15:21. They also have it in Mark 7. There's a reference, which is Peter's Gospel, 24 through 30. It's kind of a good point. I like to cross-reference these also, because looking at one, so it says, and there he arose and went away to the region of Tyre and Sidon, and he entered a house, and would not have anyone know it, yet he would not be hidden. But immediately a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an unclean spirit heard of him, and came down and fell at his feet. Now the woman was a Greek, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she begged him to cast a demon. And he said, let the children first be fed, for it is not right for the children's bread, to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. But she answered him, yes, Lord, yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. And he said to her, for this saying you may go your way, the demon has left your daughter. And she went home and found the child lying in bed, and the demon gone. And so,
That when they were in the house or something,
yeah, it says,
no, the one you just read said he went in the house. This one just said he was withdrew to the region.
yeah, it says that came and called out, O Canaanite woman. So yeah, and so this is actually that actually supports, because when you have different eyewitnesses, I mean, anybody that does investigation, I mean, if things line up too perfectly, I mean, where everybody's exactly, then that's usually a tip in investigation that it's kind of contrived, it's cooked. And so, I mean, that they're complementary and they're very close. But it doesn't say they weren't in a house. It just says she came out. Right. It doesn't say from where or what, or, so I think it's important, though, that, yeah, it is mentioned in a couple different gospel readings. And it's important because it's a teaching moment for the apostles at this point. So, okay, let's get into the Ralph Martin book. We're on page 48, top of the page. And this woman was from a big family. St. Catherine. Page 48. And so what we're looking at is the biblical worldview of the saints. So when we see the world and how we see the world is our worldview. And so we all have a different worldview. I mean, it's just because of where, I mean, everybody, you have a different background, different lives, you've experienced the world in different ways. And so you see everything through the baggage of everything you've ever kind of been through in a lot of ways. You know, I mean, we see things in ways that have been influenced by all our past experiences and even from how we were taught, you know, in early years, if we were abandoned, you know, maybe traumatic events that happened to us. All these things play into how we see the world at this point. And so now we're going to look at Catherine of Siena. And so she was the 24th of 25 children. So we'll start with that. She had a big family there. Her father was a prosperous wool dyer, and the family home is largely preserved for visitors to see today. So she was another saint who was going to die young, like St. Teresa of Lisieux. And so her process of transformation began at a remarkably young age. When she was 6, a vision of Christ the King appeared to Catherine over the Dominican church in Siena, blessing her. She felt personally called by the Lord to himself and made a promise of virginity at the age of 7. At 15, she cut off her hair as a way of resisting her parents' efforts to give her in marriage, because the parents would arrange the marriage, and so she chopped off all her hair, and that would make her not attractive to men. At 18, she convinced the leaders of the local Dominican Third Order, intended primarily for widows, to accept her as a member. For 3 years, she lived in solitude and prayer, leaving her bedroom and her family's home only for Mass. At 21, having experienced a spiritual marriage that many of the doctors we are studying speak of, she emerged from her room and began a life of service to her family and to the poor and sick in Siena. When the plague broke out in Siena, Catherine, at the age of 27, took the lead in ministering to plague victims. Wow, we could have used her the last 3 years. It soon became evident that Catherine possessed an extraordinary combination of contemplative and charismatic gifts, knowledge and wisdom, healing, deliverance, and prophecy. People recognized that God was working in her and began to seek her out for advice. She ate very little, yet lived a very active life. On one occasion, she even tried to mediate between warring parties in Italy with mixed results. She also traveled to Avignon, where the Pope Gregory XI was living. He wasn't in Rome, notice that, to urge him to overcome his fears and return to his rightful place in Rome. The Pope did return, and most scholars think that Catherine's prophetic intervention was a factor in her decision. And so she didn't really know how to read or write, but God spoke to her, God the Father. And he gave her a lot of insight, and we're going to kind of investigate that. So, bend down on 49. Jesus, the bridge over troubled water. So that wasn't just a song from the 60s, Simon and Garfunkel. This actually goes back to St. Catherine of Siena. The bridge over troubled water is Jesus. So that actually puts the song in a new perspective for some of you. One of the primary images that God the Father gave Catherine to explain the structure reality was the image of Jesus as the bridge between heaven and earth. Beneath the bridge flow dark and troubled waters, sweeping human beings into destruction. The only way over these satanically ruled waters is to take the path of the bridge that is Jesus. Well, where's Buddha? Isn't he a bridge? No? Where's Muhammad? Where's all the other ones? You know, I mean, where's the Hindus? How come there's only one way to salvation? Jesus Christ? Really? That goes against our culture. I thought there's many ways. I was taught that in a Catholic high school. There's lots of ways to heaven. It's all like going to different restaurants. If you're a Catholic, you're going to Mickey D's. He was really proud of that. And I said, I don't know. Mickey D's isn't the best place to eat. But I was taught that, and my dad was furious because he said, what heresy are they teaching you today? What's that?
I went to the same high school. At least I didn't get that.
Oh, you didn't get that. Yeah, this was...
That's other ones, but...
Yeah. It was... That was... I mean, but there is only one. You know, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. And so he is the bridge. I mean, this is biblical. The Father communicates that Jesus is the only hope for the human race to escape destruction, and that all those who know of the bridge must take it in order to be saved. The Father also tells Catherine that there really is a heaven and a hell, and that the consequences of rejecting the salvation offered in Jesus are horrifying. Human life is continually evaluated in the light of eternity. What we believe and how we behave in this life determines our eternal destinies. So what we believe and how we behave. I'm going to cross that out. That sounded like that. Actually, I'll underline it because it's important. Bernard, like Catherine, vividly expresses the deep and significant reality of our fallen condition due to original sin. In this day we are all born. All of us bear branded upon us the mark of this conspiring, burnt into us. Eve still lives in our flesh, and because of our inborn lust, the serpent schemes ceaselessly to win our consent to his rebellion. So she points out the horrors of hell. So like a bright ray of sunshine, like Larry calls me. Let's get into the horrors of hell today, Larry. Catherine continues to fill the picture as she shares more of what she understands the Father to be communicating to her. But those who do not keep this way, the bridge which is Christ, travel below through the water. No one can cross through it without drowning. Such as these are following a lie by going the way of falsehood. They are children of the devil, who is the father of lies. And because they pass through the gate of falsehood, they are eternally damned. Thus will those miserably come to their end who travel by the way beneath the bridge through the river. They never turn back to admit their sin or to ask for mercy, so they come to the gate of falsehood because they follow the teaching of the devil, who is the father of lies. And this devil is their gateway through which they come to eternal damnation. And then Bernard, he actually points out some people like David was mourning for Saul and Jonathan and Absalom because they're going to be eternally damned. He said there might be a chance for Jonathan. But if we go to the next page, we look at the 4 torments of hell that Catherine points out. The first is that the souls are deprived of seeing me. This is so painful for them that if they would choose the sight of me along with the fire and excruciating torments rather than their freedom from the pains without seeing me. The second torment is ceaseless regret and agonizing about what has been lost. For when they see that their sinfulness has deprived them of me and of the company of the angels and made them worthy instead of seeing the demons and sharing their fellowship, conscience gnaws away at them constantly. Just as theologians sometimes refer to the state of heavenly bliss as the beatific vision, God the Father indicates to Catherine that the third torment of hell will be its opposite, the demonic vision of the source of evil itself, which intensifies all the torments. The Father indicates that the lost souls, in seeing the horrific sight of the devil, come to know better what they have become through their unrepented sin. Just as in life, all knowledge of the supernatural reality is significantly veiled. After death, the veil is removed. Both evil and good are seen for what they really are. By turning to Christ, we gradually become more like him in his great beauty. By turning to sin and the devil, we become more like him in his extreme horror and ugliness. What we have become through the beliefs and actions we have given ourselves to in this life is revealed with utter clarity after death. And then she actually was given a vision of Satan, and the Father reminded, you will recall that once I let you see him for a tiny while, hardly a moment, as he really is, you said, after coming to your senses again, that you would rather walk on a road of fire, even till the final judgment day, than see him again. Even with all you have seen, you do not really know how terrible he is. And so the fourth torment is a ceaseless burning of an immaterial fire that has many forms as the forms of the sins that were committed, and is more or less severe in proportion to their seriousness. So our punishment, and this is actually, there's actually the Apocalypse of Peter I read, and it actually kind of points this out too, and is that for each sin there is a express, like torment in hell that goes with that sin. For on their bodies will appear the mark of their evil deeds, with pain and excruciating torment. And when they hear with terror those words, "Depart, you cursed ones, into everlasting fire," soul and body will enter the company of the demons with no hope of return. They will be engulfed in all the filth of the earth, in as many ways as their evil deeds were different. The misers will be plunged into the filth of greed, engulfed at once in the burning fire, and the goods of the world that they loved inordinately. The violent will be engulfed in cruelty, the indecent in indecency and wretched lust, the unjust in their own injustice, the envious in envy, and those who were hateful and bitter toward their neighbors will be engulfed in hate. Their disordered love for themselves, out of which grew all their wickedness, will burn and torture them intolerably. For along with pride, it is the head and source of all evil. So will they all be differently punished, soul and body together. Bernard points out that many do not grasp these truths due to a lack of contemplative insight, or by failing to invite the action of the Holy Spirit into bringing sacred scripture to life. So, and what happened in Fatima, I believe it was Fatima. It's either Fatima or St. Faustina, but the majority of the people that are in hell didn't believe it existed. I guess that's the, so just because you don't believe it exists, that's not going to stop you from going there. I mean, we can, I guess we have to be aware of it, because this is pretty sobering stuff here that, when you think about these torment, and this is forever and ever. After 100 trillion years, it'll be like day one. When you get to the amount of our national debt, it'll only be the first day. So, it's not, it's really, it's hard to conceptualize, infinite amount of time. But we want to make the right choices here. We want to be heading toward heaven. And that's the whole goal is we want, and like St. Teresa of Avila said, people don't go there because they don't desire it. It's the choices we make, and she's going to get into that here too.
Tom, do you think that Satanists realize that there is hell and they're choosing that?
Oh, I think a lot of people do realize it, yeah. I think actually the Satanists are more aware of it than Catholics, because they're willing to spend $300 to $500 on a consecrated host. So they believe it. They put their money where their mouth is. We're Catholics, like, oh, I'm the body of Christ. Oh, thank you, not even thinking that that's our Lord. So yeah, I think many do, and I've seen some. They're serious.
They don't obviously have the complete understanding of how horrible hell is or can be, but they're buying into that this is what I want my destiny to be.
Yeah, and I think, people say, oh, it'll be a big party in hell. They can make up all kinds of stuff to, try to justify their actions. But again, it comes down to our worldview. Are we living for this moment, or are we living, for eternity? And I guess that's why keep your eye on the cross, keep your eye on, that's why it's good to have a target. And I mention this all the time. If you're going to be doing shooting practice and you're blindfolded and spun around, who knows where you're going to hit? You want to be able to see what you're shooting at. And it's the same, we got the Bible and guns, so we're right in the same topic here, but we want to definitely be shooting for heaven. that's what we want to go there. And so, go ahead, Kyle.
Well, I mean, kind of on that note, I'm struck by just how in the first torment God's talking about, is there, that first the souls of the proud saying, this is so painful that they would choose the sight of me alongside fire and excuse me torments rather than freedom for the pain without seeing me. I think that's a very mild way of talking about just how beautiful God is. And,
Right.
That's maybe the bright light in the brainstorm right now is something like that, because it's just it's not something I can wrap my head around, but then again, we're all humans who aren't dead yet, so we probably wouldn't. But just that thought alone, that like God is so beautiful that like the people in hell would rather see God and stay in hell than get out of hell but not see God.
Yeah, and what's really good here is that, so we're going to look at the fear of the Lord, but it also goes on to the glory of heaven, which is the next page. So the fear of the Lord that is spoken in the Bible is not just a concept, but an experience that predisposes us to wisdom. In fact, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. A good understanding have all those who practice it. Psalm 111 and Sirach. The fear is not the fear of a tyrannical God who impetuously and arbitrarily inflicts punishment, but the proper respect and fear of a God who administers just punishment for those who deserve it. The biblical fear of the Lord is an intelligent fear, based on a deep perception of the holiness and majesty of God, which rightly recognizes the possibility of violating the law of God, despising his love, rejecting his mercy, and meriting eternal separation from him. While the fear of the Lord is simply the beginning of wisdom, and the end of wisdom is love, and that's in 1 John 4:17, one doesn't jump into love without a deep and ongoing experience of biblical, spirit-inspired fear. The scripture tells us, in fact, that blessed is the man who fears the Lord, and that, indeed, this God-given fear of the Lord frees us from other fears. He is not afraid of evil news. His heart is firm, trusting in the Lord. His heart is steady. He will not be afraid. So today there is a great aversion to an appropriate fear of the Lord, and consequently, there is a great trivialization of love and a great foolishness as regards to the relationship with God. Fear of the Lord is a gift of God. It is not opposed to love, but prepares for it. Fear of the Lord and love of the Lord go together. One of the reasons why there has been so much foolishness in the church and in the world is because there is such a lack of fear of the Lord, and that's the truth. You can see that where people aren't, people lost respect for parents, for authorities, like the police, the priests, you name it, there's been, any authority figures have been looked overturned, or even law, break the law, I make the joke about there's a hurricane, I need a 72-inch TV because I'm hungry, run out of Walmart with. There's that, but that's stealing. We should have a fear that if we do something like steal, there's going to be a consequence, and we may go to hell for that. There should be that fear that if I do something, there's a consequence. I could be going to hell if I do that. And that should deter me. That should be one of the reasons that deters me from doing it. Yeah, I love the Lord with all my heart, strength, and soul, but I'm also afraid to go to hell, and I'm not going to do that. And that sometimes is where it starts. That is where it starts. It's the beginning of wisdom. And I think it's important that, we have this love of the Lord, and you don't want to hurt someone you love. At the same time, there should be a proper fear against breaking what he said no. He said, no, don't do that, and we should listen to what he says. Adam broke one. He said, don't eat that. And he broke that one freedom. That one thing that he said no to, he broke. He said, you'll die, and he did. He didn't understand exactly, he died. He was basically immortal, walking with God, and at that point, death entered the world. So,
If those in hell, do they regret their decision? Wish they could come back and change, or?
Well, we'll get to that. Yeah, this kind of is addressed a little bit. Go ahead, Kyle.
Oh, I mean, I can wait into that, just add a point of that, but you can wait.
Yeah, we actually get to that
Oh,
in a few minutes. Because, yeah, they say
I
that
wondered about that.
people make a decision. We're choosing heaven or hell, and by the time we rush to where we're going to go at that point. And so the next page, we have the glory of heaven. One of the most striking things that Catherine relays from God the Father is how much more depth there is to reality than many commonly suppose. Sin and evil are far more ugly and more horrendous than most of us can imagine. But so too are the beauty, glory, and goodness of heaven, greater than we can comprehend. And so it's not, we can look at how terrible hell is. We should also, there's the carrot and the stick, right? So that's the stick. But the carrot, it's not a carrot, it's the glory and beauty of heaven and God should compel us to run in that direction.
I mean, we don't know how good is unless we know how bad is. Really, when you look at both extremes.
Right. Yeah, we're seeing it. At least that's a blessing that we're getting to see how bad can be. And it's all around us. And as we, and as you see more of the world embrace the things against God, you can see how ugly our society is becoming. And so you can see that as people embrace evil, how distorted and ugly and, just how terrible everything's looking to us because it's opposed to God. It's opposed to his natural order. And as we go against God's natural order, and we rightfully see it as what it should be, which is horrific. The more we're going against how God properly wants it to be. And we're seeing that in our culture, we're seeing it in our world, we're seeing it in our church. It's all around us. But, so let's go to page 59. This answers Tom's question. We choose our own destiny. How great is the stupidity of those who make themselves weak in spite of my strengthening and put themselves into the devil's hands. I want you to know then that at the moment of death, because they have put themselves during life under the devil's rule, not by force, because they cannot be forced, as I told you, but they put themselves voluntarily into his hands, and because they come to the point of death under his perverse rule, they can expect no other judgment but that of their own conscience. They come without hope to eternal damnation. In hate, they grasp at hell at the moment of their death. And even before they possess it, they take hell as their prize, along with their lord, the demons. As horrible as the final moments of unrepentant sinners are, so wonderful are the final moments of those who die trusting in the mercy of the Lord. The just, on the other hand, have lived in charity and die in love. If they have lived perfectly in virtue, enlightened by faith, seeing with faith, and trusting completely in the blood of the Lamb, when they have come to the point of death, they see the good I have prepared for them. They embrace it with the arms of love, reaching out with the grasp of love of me, to me, the supreme and eternal good, at the very edge of death. And so they taste eternal life even before they have left their mortal bodies. Even purgatory makes sense as a marvelous provision of God's mercy, a wonderful part of the good news. There are some who have passed through this life and arrive at the end point of death with only a commonplace love, and were never very perfect. These embrace my mercy with the same light of faith and hope as those who were perfect. But these have this light imperfectly, and because they are imperfect, they reach out for mercy, considering my mercy greater than their own guilt. So no one waits to be judged. All receive their appointed place as they leave this life. They taste it and possess it even before they leave their bodies at the moment of death. The damned in hate and despair, the perfect in love, with light of faith and trusting in the blood, and the imperfect in mercy, and with the same faith, come to the place called purgatory. This is interesting too, because the state of our soul even determines how the Lord appears to us. You see, the gaze of the Lord, though ever in itself unchanged, does not always produce the same effect. It conforms to each person's deserts, inspiring some with fear, but bringing solace and security to others. Have you ever seen that picture there's a picture of Jesus, and you can see it, and it looks very kind and loving, or it looks very stern. It's yeah, I saw it. I saw it once before, and it's just amazing because it exactly, because if you see, you can see God as just, very stern and angry, and I mean it's the same picture. But if you're an enemy of Christ, then you'll see him in a certain way. But if you're a friend of Christ and you're under his, you're a sheep and you're following him and you hear his voice, he looks kind and loving, and you rely on his mercy. And so it's kind of interesting how, so we choose, though. The point, Tom, is that we choose where we're going to go before we even leave this earth.
Even the divine mercy is kind and can be stern at the same time. That right behind you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tom, in this book, it makes it sound like you're either evil and filled with hate, or you're, filled with love and going to heaven. But we all know people who are like not Catholic, but are very charitable, very loving, very giving of themselves to their neighbors. They work the soup kitchens. They, where do they fit? I mean,
Well, are they on the bridge over troubled water or not? I mean, I guess that's the question is, and Saint Bernard actually says that, looked upon in God's light. Many of my charities appeared only as part of my, pride or something else. I mean, so it's only on the blood of Christ. I mean, and so depends. It depends. It's up to, it's outside the normal means. There is no salvation outside and this is a church that God set up. And so outside of that, I know a lot of people that do a lot of great charity works and stuff like that, but they also, I talk to them, I'm like, well, yeah, you're doing great things, yet you're not following God's law and this and this and this. I mean, you still are addicted to pornography, you're doing this and this. And yeah, you're doing good things and you appear nice on the outside, but this is contrary to God's law. I mean, and I've had those conversations and they're like, well, I can't lose my salvation. I say, well, that's a bunch of crap. I mean, so we got to understand that, I can't say anything about any particular person, but I can say the normal means is through the Catholic Church. And I want to be in the state of grace, because if you're either in the state of grace or you're not. And if you're in the state of grace, then it is kind of black and white. It's not, we want to, that's what we want to do in our society now. It's like, oh, the road is so wide and everybody loves God and they're just love and it's all love. And and we're all going to heaven, right? You're saved. You can't lose your salvation. That's not what Christ said. And that's where he makes that point. And that's the biggest quote of St. John of the Cross. And a lot of the doctors of the church, they say the road is narrow that leads to salvation. The number that go there are few.
I was just going to say, charitable giving, especially from wealthy philanthropists, depends on what charities they're giving to. I mean, they have the guilt complex here, but if they're devoting their money to climate change, or devoting their money to gender
transitioning,
ideology or whatever, or abortion, I mean, in their mind, they're doing charitable things, contributing.
Right.
But it's not necessarily doing what God wants them to do.
Right. And so I guess, yeah. And so, Donna, I don't know. And I'm not going to say, but I do think that it's safest to be, upon the ark. Think about it. Everybody else was destroyed but 8 people. So I want to be on the narrow road. I don't want to I don't want to be nonchalant about it and say, oh, it's just a little sin. It's okay. Everybody's doing it. It's easy to go down that road because that's the road Satan wants us to follow, because that's the easy road. And it's hard to say no, and it's hard to say stay on the straight path. It's hard to do. It's difficult. And, that's why the road is narrow that leads to salvation. So I don't want to, and I wouldn't be doing my duty if I were to say, yeah, I think they're fine and there could be, because the normal means is that, it's through the Catholic Church. And if they're not in the state of grace when they die, then, you know, or they're in mortal sin, the teaching of the church is they go to hell. So, you know, if you're in a state of mortal sin, which is a deadly sin, and you die, then that doesn't mean that they didn't make it the last moment. You know, there could be some means, and God is God. He can do whatever he wants. And I pray for the salvation of, you know, and that's what I long for, is their salvation, because I have many, many friends who, for whatever reason, you know, they aren't Catholic anymore, whatever, but, you know, I know the normal means, and that's why I try to bring them back into the boat. And unfortunately, the boat is sinking with the people we have at the helm. They're running it to the cliff, but that's another story.
You hate to think that money buys boats, but just like what happened here in Michigan, recently in Ohio, when the abortion bills, you know, that save lives got defeated, we were outspent tremendously. I just read in Ohio it was almost like 5-1, millions of dollars poured into the pro-abortion. I mean, this Planned Parenthood, with all the money that they get, I mean.
Who's the prince of the air? Satan.
You hate to think that money buys votes, but unfortunately, it does in a lot of situations.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, I mentioned this to the men's group. I'm like, well, you know, I mean, it's easy to kind of come down hard on some of the Protestant groups, but you know what? I know that a lot of them are definitely tithing 10%. So, and that's their first fruits. So they're giving 10% of their gross, a lot of them, and they're doing a lot of charity works with a lot of those things. Here in the Catholic Church, I mean, you probably won't get $10 from a lot of people instead of 10%. You know, I mean, so are we really, and so God, we're going to be accountable for that too. And we're going to be accountable. It says, hold your alms into your hands until they sweat. So we should know who we give, you know, our alms to. We should research them and have, you know, I mean, we're going to give with the right intention, but we should be wise that we're not giving, this Catholic charity that supports abortion or something. We got to be careful that we don't.
That's a key, wise, because when I say buy votes, it's not necessarily putting money in the hands of people, although some of that goes on, but the wisdom in the diabolical advertising.
Right.
All of that stuff that gets fed to everybody, and they're watching the TV. The best advice I got from my doctor when we're talking about stress and anxiety, he says, Dan, turn your TV off.
And you want to know the best advice? The people who live the longest usually don't go to the doctors. We're going to get into Tobit if that's okay, or we stopped here on. We'll stop at the beginning of page 60, because the father goes on a bit about no one waits to be judged. All receive their appointed place as they leave this life, and it's pretty clear though, Tom. So that was a good question, and it came right up. So we are on page 18, courage and burying the dead. So this guy, Tobit, he was doing good works, and so one of the things that he did, a work of charity, is burying the dead, and so that is an act of charity. And so it does say in Scripture that almsgiving covers a multitude of sins. So remember that. So almsgiving covers a multitude of sins. In the days of Shalmaneser, I performed many acts of charity to my brethren. I would give bread to the hungry, and my clothing to the naked. And if I saw any one of my people dead and thrown out behind the wall of Nineveh, I would bury him. And if Sennacherib, the king, put to death any who were fleeing from Judea, I buried them secretly. For in his anger he put many to death. When the bodies were sought by the king, they were not found. Then one of the men of Nineveh went and informed the king about me, that I was burying them, so I hid myself. When I learned that I was being searched for to be put to death, I left my home in fear. Then all my property was confiscated, and nothing was left to me except my wife Anna and my son Tobias. Well, at least they left him his son and wife. But not 50 days passed before two of Sennacherib's sons killed him, and they fled to the mountains of Ararat. Then Esarhaddon, his son, reigned in his place, and he appointed Ahikar, a son of my brother Anael, over all the accounts of his kingdom and over the entire administration. Aachar interceded for me, and I returned to Nineveh. Now Aachar was cupbearer, keeper of the signet, and in charge of the administration to the accounts for Esarhaddon, who had appointed him second to himself. He was my nephew. So God blessed him by having his nephew intercede for him. He was burying the dead, and the king was mad about this because he had killed him and he wanted him laying around, apparently, to strike fear into all the people. And so once he found out this guy's burying the dead, he said, well, get him, I'm going to kill him too. So he fled, they took all his possessions, and that was it. When I arrived home and my wife Anna and my son Tobias, they were restored to me at the feast of Pentecost, which is the sacred festival of the 7 weeks. A good dinner was prepared for me, and I sat down to eat. Upon seeing the abundance of food, I said to my son, go and bring whatever poor man of our brethren you may find among the exiles in Nineveh, who is mindful of the Lord, and he shall eat together with me. You see, he had that heart for the poor. He had the heart to help others. I will wait for you until you come back. So Tobias went out to look for some poor person of our people. When he came back, he said, Father. And I replied, here I am, my child. And he said, look, Father, one of our own people has been murdered and thrown into the marketplace, and now he lies there strangled. So before I tasted anything, I sprang up and removed the body to a place of shelter until sunset, where I may bury it. And when I returned, I washed myself and ate my food in sorrow. Then I remembered the prophecy of Amos, how he had said against Bethel, your feast shall be turned into mourning, and all your songs into lamentation, and I wept. When the sun had set, I went and dug a grave and buried the body. And my neighbors laughed at me and said, he is still not afraid. He has already been hunted down to be put to death for doing this, and he ran away. Yet here he is burying the dead again. On the same night after I, Tobit, returned from burying the dead, I went into the courtyard and slept by the wall of the courtyard, and my face was uncovered because of the heat. I did not know that there were sparrows on the wall, and their fresh droppings fell into my open eyes, and the white films formed on my eyes. I went to the physicians to be healed, but the more they treated me with ointments, the more my vision was obscured by the white films, until I became completely blind. For 4 years I remained unable to see. All my kindred were sorry for me, and Aachar took care of me for 2 years until he went to Elamias. And we'll stop there because this kind of points out that no good deed goes unpunished. I'm just joking.
So at this time, it wasn't unclean to touch a dead body?
No, so what happened is he was expelled from the temple. And so what happened is he cleansed himself. If you notice, he did cleanse himself. And there's a longer version which said he cleansed himself both when he touched the body and then after he buried the body. And so he was following the law. He followed the law throughout all of it, and he also did the laws of charity. So, okay, what's that? We can, yeah, you want to, we can actually go, we can go to the end of 2. Tobias' wife earns their livelihood. Then my wife, Anna, earned money at woman's work. She used to send the product to the owners, and they paid her wages. One day, the 7th of Distress, when she cut off a piece she had woven and sent it to the owners, they paid her full wages, and they also gave her a kid, which is a small goat. When she returned to me, it began to bleat. So I called to her and said to her, where did you get the kid? It is not stolen, is it? Return it to the owners, for it is not right to eat what is stolen. And she said, it was given to me as a gift in addition to my wages. But I did not believe her and told her to return it to the owners. And I blushed for her. Then she replied to me, where are your charities and your righteous deeds? You seem to know everything. And we'll stop with that. I think that's great. Just the human interactions, I mean, where even though he's a righteous man, you said it, Donna.
people are trying to kill themselves, like pursue it, like
It's just really, I mean, it shows the human emotions, and I mean, he's trying to do what's right, and it seems, you know, I mean, he's burying the dead, and the guy hunts him down and tries to kill him, so he has to flee with, and they take all his stuff. He comes back, you know, he's restored. He buries the dead, you know, and then he's sitting there, and bird droppings fall in his eye because he's wiped out from burying the dead, and he gets blind for 4 years. 4 years. We're not talking about a short amount of time. That's a long period of time.